Welcome, good afternoon. Right, and now for something completely different, I guess. I'm Alaster Yoxhall, as they say. I'm from Sheffield, Hallam University. I am not a waste manager. I don't work in a hospital. I don't do facilities, and I'm not a manager. But I'm pleased to be here again for the second year. Last time I was here, I talked about reusable packaging. My expertise is in packaging, and my actual expertise is generally, or has been in the past, about how older people and people with disabilities use packaging, how they're excluded from food, medicines and so on. And I've actually been inclusive design, basically, including trying to design packaging that people can use and is fit for purpose. Now, thinking about that in the broadest possible sense, thinking about how packaging is fit for purpose, that is started to include design for recycling and reducing waste. So where I have become more interested recently in how people started with how older people and people with disabilities disposed of packaging, but actually working with the NHS and other people on how packaging becomes waste and how we can stop it. So I'm going to talk a little bit at sort of high level around packaging and packaging waste and how we are and how it happens. And it ties in with some of the things that Dean was saying. So, as I say, I'm not a waste manager per se. It's no surprise to you that the NHS is one of the biggest producers of healthcare waste in Europe, you know. And I don't know how it ties in with Dean's figures, but from Innovate UK, 11,000 tonnes of waste daily. So, you know, a lot of waste, you know, naturally. And obviously it's a mixture of things. I'm talking about plastic waste here because plastic's been in the news a lot recently, isn't it? And it's the expensive, coming back to Dean's point about cost per tonne, when we're talking about getting rid of this stuff, plastic packaging is the stuff that is very, very expensive if you, to get rid of. Now, I teach on a course, I teach a packaging course, and we teach about what packaging does nowadays. Now, we actually have 9, I'm only going to talk about 3 of the things today, but we actually have 9 duties that packaging does, the modern duty of packaging. So obviously, historically, we've asked packaging to protect, preserve and promote. That's what we used to. We go down to a supermarket or wherever else. Obviously, and it screams at us to buy it, it does whatever else, and so on and so forth. And we have to protect stuff, obviously, as it's driven around, or it's in a storeroom, or in a warehouse, or whatever it may be. But for a number of years now, we're obviously on this mantra that you'll have heard: reduce, reuse and recycle. I'm sure that's something you've all heard of before, coming through from organisations such as WRAP, which is the Waste Reduction Action Programme. Lots of useful things on their website if you ever wanted to go, if you've ever interacted with them. So reduce, reuse, recycle is our mantra. It's something that we're familiar with. But I want to take us on a little journey, because my presentation is, if you like, a sort of journey. I want to talk about as to how we've got to where we are now, and what those of us who are involved in packaging and packaging design, which is becoming waste effectively, or we're trying to make it not waste, what we're trying to do and how we're trying to think about it. So actually, so the first recycling in the UK was actually way back, it's perhaps not as far back as you think really, 1977. I was but a nipper, 10 years old. All right, so that's revealing my age. So I was 10 in 1977, and first recycling glass. Not perhaps unsurprisingly, we might be familiar with that. We're generally familiar with the idea of glass recycling. It's been there in our lives, hasn't it? 1977 in Barnsley, not a surprise there too. If you've ever been, there's glass plants there. So they were trying to get glass back into the system. And the reason, what was happening to waste at that time, and it's quite a shocking statistic, we were putting things in landfill, okay? Putting things in landfill costs money now, okay? Landfill tax. But you don't have to go that far back. It's only 15 years or so, a bit longer, that the largest man-made structure on Earth was a landfill site in New York State that was twice the size of Birmingham. All right, so that's what we was doing. So twice the size of the West Midlands area was just a landfill site for New York alone. All right, so we were dumping this stuff in, and it couldn't continue. So introduced landfill taxes, and landfill tax has, and academics like me have gone and studied all these sort of things, because that's what we do. You know, we like to prove anecdote, keeps us busy. And, you know, we looked at landfill taxes, all sorts of taxes have come in, and this is what's happened. This is the last figures I could get, but we see less and less waste going to landfill. The cost, I think, is about 120 something pounds per tonne now, I don't know, but, you know, goes up. And we are used to this scenario, aren't we? Coming back to the bins, we're talking about whether they're in a hospital, whether they're in one of your facilities, whether they're in a catering room, or whether they're outside. We have this idea that we separate out waste. And whether we do that or we have other people who, you know, Biffa or Veolia or whoever it is, waste management teams doing things, it's become part of our everyday lives, okay, now we get to 2025. But recycling rates have flatlined, and there are problems. I couldn't get figures for non-household waste, but it's a known thing that it is, and we are struggling to get this stuff recycled for all sorts of reasons. Okay, waste is becoming more complicated, has been more complicated. Systems problems around getting the cost of being able to sort it and so on and so forth. The technology around sorting it, difficult. But we're still here. We still need to do this thing. We still need to reduce, reuse and recycle. It's not going away. And the pressures on us are getting bigger. We talked about Dean's talking about the costs per tonne of this stuff. So we've got packaging producer responsibilities where there is a tax on the amount of packaging you produce. Okay, that is so we have things called packaging recovery notes produced by the government to tell you the price of the waste that you produce, and then a market to understand that price to get you to produce less packaging. Okay, and that drove what we might term in terms of packaging waste, the sort of lightweighting phenomenon. So if you hold a glass Coke bottle nowadays compared to a glass Coke bottle of 20 years ago, it's a lot lighter, okay? And so these sort of taxes and things like that create a change in the way the packaging is. You think you hold a plastic bottle, say it's really light, isn't it? You can almost crush them, you know, really, really easily. Those things, these taxes, plastic packaging tax, PRN taxes, have actually changed the way in which the packaging is designed, okay? And then there's another one on its way. It's on its way. When's October? It's soon, isn't it? So EPR, if you know all about it, anybody involved in it, extended producer responsibility is on its way, where you, the supplier, the person who produces that packaging, is responsible for its end of life, full stop. Okay, so EPR is here, or it's arriving, and there are different rates. And unlike PRNs, where medical packaging wasn't, I believe, involved in PRNs, it is involved in EPR. So packaging waste across the stream has another tax coming on it. Okay, and it's on its way, and it's expensive. I've seen the guideline prices, and it's expensive, the kind of numbers that Dean was talking about. So a new tax is on its way. And again, this is about trying to create, when you go to the government's website, when you go to the key phrase here is this idea of circular economy package. So the idea around EPR is that you are responsible for where that ends up as a packaging producer, and therefore it's trying to create a circular economy, a circular system. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. We're going to talk a little bit about what circularity is, okay? But this is a tax driven by the idea of creating a market to improve circulability and reduce waste, reduce littering, these sort of things, along with other things that are actually coming into into the mix, such as deposit return schemes and various things like that. And so what we have at the moment, or what we've had from that 1970, or prior to that 1970 for a lot of it, is this linear system where we take, make and dispose, okay? And that's what we're sort of used to. And what we're actually trying to do, and if you think about Dean's presentation, the tie-in to mine is that what we're thinking about is actually packaging or waste, whether it's packaging or other kinds of waste, as a system, isn't it? All the things that Dean was saying, where it went wrong and the waste ended up in the wrong bin, is its systems thinking about waste as a system and not as just this thing, not as a tissue with blood on it, but where it sits in that system. And so that's really, in many ways, the key sort of message I want to get across. I'm sort of giving you the conclusion before we get there, so please don't go though. But the point is, it's thinking about these things as a system, okay? And this is one was Albert Payne, who's a sort of material scientist. He said, well, packaging, because obviously I'm talking about packaging. Like I say, I'm not a facilities manager or a waste manager per se. But if we think about it, it's a coordinated system for preparing and the transportation, the retailing and the delivery and of food, of materials, of medicines or whatever else. It's a system. And we've actually got very good at it. It's one of the reasons why sometimes people say to me, oh, why can't we go back with milk to little electronic milk floats and glass bottles and so on? We've got very good at having big logistical systems that move things around the country, you know, lightweight and fast and quick. Think about it. I could order something on my phone. Now, it'd be very rude if I did that. But if I ordered something on my phone, I could have it by 10 o'clock tonight. We have got very good at creating systems that move things, store things and move them around. And packaging facilitates us to do that. Yeah, and if you want to do a degree apprenticeship, I'll tell you what, how packaging has emancipated women and all sorts of other things. But anyway, that's not for now. But packaging allows us to do that. It's a great thing. But it is part, and it's what Dean's talking about, it's part of what we call a socio-technical system. And this is the rub for us. This is the tricky bit. This is the difficult bit. Socio-technical systems have people in them. They have, obviously, technology. They have culture, processes, procedures, goals, and metrics. And you guys all have goals and metrics. You're told you've got to reduce food waste. You've got to measure it. You've got to measure this waste. You've got to get to that target. But it is complicated within this complex system. And hospitals are complex places. Okay, there is no doubt about that. And we're trying to deal with a socio-technical system that where you pull on one of these nodes, so if we pull on this bit, it might affect that bit because it's attached to it. And we don't necessarily know by pulling on one of those things, by changing some sort of system, how it changes the outcome until we actually do some work, till we get down and look at it. But we have to think about it in that way. There is no other choice. Otherwise, the bloody tissue gets put in the wrong bin and so on and so forth. And there's a guy called Stafford Beer who was a sort of intellectual theorist. And he said the point of a system is what it does. Right, which is quite useful. I like this phrase because it allows us to stand back from the things we're doing and go, well, what does it do? What does the system that I'm putting in place in my hospital, in my trust, in my thing, what does it actually do? And the reality for us as packaging people and all the rest of it is at the moment we create waste. Shit tons of the stuff. In actual fact, to use a phrase, you can quote me on it, Professor Alaster, Yoxhall, Sheffield, Hallam University, only 10% of the world's waste is recycled. Just think about that for a second. We, with our great systems, create an awful lot of waste. Now, we do lots of other good things as well. I'm able to get that thing off Amazon by 10 o'clock tonight. But also, in doing so, we create an awful lot of waste. So our system delivers things. It delivers healthcare, it delivers drugs, it delivers food. But it creates waste. And obviously, it's hit the nub for those of us not involved in hospital stuff, says he banging his microphone, I do apologise, is when the Blue Planet effect, wasn't it? When David Attenborough was whales and plastic bags and things like that all around. And my phone just ran red hot after that. How do we substitute out plastics? How do we get rid of plastics? How do we get rid of this lot? Because it's killing people. And it is, by the way. I mean, it's a real problem. In my professorial lecture, I talked about how plastic and microplastics, we talk about public health problem. Microplastics has been found in breast milk, it's been found in baby's milk, it's been found in sperm, it's been found in these things. All from, I was at a conference with the government a while back talking about waste, litter, fugitive waste, as I think it's called in the industry, fugitive waste as a public health problem. Okay, so we know that it is. And so one of the solutions to it is a circular economy, which is coming back to our EPR that is coming on us and we can't get away from it, where we have the idea of circularity around the system. So the natural side here, so all of this is renewable, and completely renewable, and all of this is our finite material side, which we're trying to deal with. We are trying to deal with that with our systems. So this is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Ellen MacArthur was is, I guess, she probably still does it, doesn't she? She sailed around the world single-handedly. I think she was the first woman to do that. And she noticed the amount of litter in the oceans as she was doing it. There are gyres in the oceans, and we're given using sizes bigger than France, okay? There's about 8 of them around the world, just huge tracts of plastic in the middle of the ocean, okay? And just waste and stuff like that. Massive, massive places. I think there's 8 in each of the big oceans where there's like a stasis. So the idea is, she noticed all this, so they've come up, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation come up with a model. And the idea is, and I'll show on the next slide in actual fact, that we try and keep as tight a loop as possible in many ways, what we're trying to do. So when I was here last year, I talked about reusable packaging, but the idea is we try and keep as tight a loop as possible around that, because that uses the least amount of resources, okay? And the further out we go, we use more, but there are problems. Reusable packaging is hard, and I don't think we're really there yet in many ways. You know, we've got other things to do, and we're really sort of at this sort of space. We're still around here where we're trying to recycle and get things recycled and move things around. Reusable is hard, it's getting there, but then we have to be careful. And we also have to be careful with recycling when we say we're reusable. So here's an example of reusable that we like to do. Bags for life. I don't know how long, I'm 58. I don't think I've got a 58-year-old bag. Does that make sense? I think bag for about 6 months is about whatever it is. And we actually use more plastic now making bags for life than we did when we had carrier bags. So we have to be very, very careful about what we're trying to do with our systems. Because if we're trying to reduce the amount of plastic we use, then bags for life, say, and whether that's a bag for life in a hospital in some way, carrying something around, isn't doing it. It is not necessarily doing it. You might end up using more CO2, okay? But if you're trying to, you might end up using more plastic, and you might end up using more CO2. You have to think about what it is. So, for instance, I said this last year, and it's a revelation to some people. The least harmful way to have a bottle of Coke, or have some Coke, in the UK is in a plastic bottle. That is still the case whether we like that or not. And we can invent paper bottles, we can do whatever we like, but a plastic bottle is still the least CO2. But that plastic bottle does get in the ocean, or could get in the ocean, and eventually could get in breast milk and so on and so forth. So it is a complex thing that we're trying to do. We have to be very careful. And so when we're talking about reusable things, we have to make sure that that loop stays small. And I think hospitals are complicated, but it's infrastructure and dispersed responsibility, I think, that causes it. And I was having a conversation about this with somebody else in the corridor, how complicated it is to make things happen. When you pull a lever and nothing happens, you guys perhaps have a chance to have the lever attached to things. Does that make sense? In a way that other organisations might not be able to. And, you are almost in a way a closed environment, so you can trial things, you can do things, you can understand the effects of things in a way that I can't when I'm trying to do some things. So, as I'm coming to the end of the presentation, what I want to talk about is this idea of circular design. So designing things for circularity. So that can be our systems and our things that we use. And so, design is crucial. I would say that I work in a design department in a university, but it's the truth, okay? I'm not here. And so what we're thinking about is through this reduce, reuse, recycle, we're thinking about how we place design to reduce, design to reuse, and design to recycle. And that when we say design, that can be designing your system, designing your process, designing your labelling so it's understandable by people, designing that whole thing through so that, I saw those charts that Dean put on and I didn't understand them, and I'm supposedly clever. So, yeah, We have to keep these things simple. So one of the things we'll talk about as we go towards the end is this idea of design for recycling, because that's where we're kind of at the moment with packaging. I know this is some slides from a waste management company that I've sort of put in the presentation, but it's talking about if you're going to design this stuff, don't use packaging in this way or use it in a certain way. So shrink sleeves, plastic sleeves, make them able to be removed, make them, we see this with hot snacks, don't we? Hot snacks now, so there's a brand, several brands that have paper on the outside that you can remove and so on and so forth, just trying to help us design for recycling. You know, thinking about removing black plastic, there's less black plastic, isn't it? If you buy a ready meal nowadays, it's virtually never in a black plastic thing. Again, improving recyclability. This is all designed for recyclability that's happening. And I'm sure we can do this too for our hospital environments. And so coloured opaque bottles and all the rest of it, trying to get clear bottles. We had this with the glass industry. There was a big problem for the glass industry in the UK because for a long time we used to drink wine a lot, but produce spirits. So the glass that we had in the country was coloured, but the glass we made was clear. So it was a real problem for the recycling people to balance those things out. And it's now happening with the plastics people. Does that make sense? So it's creating this idea. You may have seen now that we now have white bottle tops on milk bottles, don't we? That is designed for recycling, okay? So it can all be crushed up together and not cause pollution. But showing my age again, you know, Avril Lavigne here, she wrote a song in the 90s called Complicated. It is complicated. There is no doubt about that. Okay, and we do have this complex socio-technical system. We have, okay, it is complicated, but it's, you know, we've put people on the moon, we've done complex things, we can do complex things, it's okay. We just have to start somewhere. And one of the reasons why coming into Dean's, and I think this ties in nicely, I just did a project looking at recycling for a packaging company, and we showed people, these are what are called OPRL labels. I don't know if you're familiar with that lot. So they're all on all packaging, and you pay into OPRL, you can put this on your packaging, helps people. Nobody'd seen this sign before on the packaging, and we were asking people whether they could recycle their flexible packaging. And no, you can't recycle it. I go, have you seen this sign? No. And then when you went to the supermarket, they hid the thing around the back under the stairs so nobody seen it, because it looks a mess, it looks dirty, and it with all the packaging outside it and so on and so forth. So coming back to our systems, we're not doing it even in non-hospital environments. The system isn't working, and this confusion that Dean talked about exists in our own lives. I did the same as Dean, but I did it in people's houses, and there was all sorts of packaging that shouldn't have been in the bin. There was all sorts of recyclate in the thing because people are confused and people don't know and people don't understand. And I leave it with this sort of thing. We all know what that symbol is, don't we? Every single person in this room knows what that symbol is. And if I was stood in France, every person in that room would know what that symbol is. And if I was stood in America, they would all know. Yet somehow we can't do it with recycling. We have a separate recycling label if you're in Germany, if you're in Japan, if you're whatever else. This thing, we're making this thing complicated. And the ultimate key from what I say to you is we've got to make it simple, okay? And then it will happen. All right, so thank you very much. That's my presentation.